Hey everyone, Self-Worth School is back in session. I'm so pleased to be joined by Jo today. Really excited to have this conversation. Jo, thanks so much for saying yes and coming on the podcast, and welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Rosie. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. So you're our guest teacher today, delivering your lesson, and you've had some really powerful experiences when it comes to speaking up and using your voice. Can you give us the kind of short version of your journey and how you came to do the work that you're doing today?
Sure. So for about 25 years, I worked for the Australian government. I was a diplomat. I worked for our Governor General, and I was the Chief of Staff to the Deputy Prime Minister. And for the most part, I loved it. I worked big hours, but I travelled around the world. I was working on consequential issues, and I was in rooms where big decisions were being made nationally and internationally. And so I honestly thought that this would be a career I'd have through to retirement, that this would be the job I had for life. And then, as they say, life has other plans. And in 2024, I was hit with a bit of a life quake, a curveball I didn't really see coming. And I learned what happens inside powerful systems when something goes wrong and when speaking up becomes difficult and silence is expected. And you have that fork in the road moment where you've got to decide what you're going to do. So in my case, the scene setting for this was that, like many people who go to work, you might occasionally encounter an issue in the workplace. In my case, I had noticed some adverse behaviour that was starting to impact me. And so I privately had a word with my boss about it, who's a man that I knew for 10 years. Yes, he was the Deputy Prime Minister, but he was also someone that I knew very well. And what followed was something that I could never have anticipated. I was not asking for anything in particular, and I was sent home. When I tried to come back, I was told I couldn't. I was sidelined from my role. I was effectively locked out of my office, and I was isolated from my team, and I had no idea why. It was confusing, it was cruel, and it was completely unnecessary. And for a long time, I did what I was supposed to do. I suffered in silence. I actually kept the situation to myself for 5 months, I think it was in the end. And I didn't tell people what was happening. And the load of carrying that secret and carrying that trauma on my own was really hard. My world became incredibly small bit by bit. I stopped even going out because I didn't want people to ask about my job where I'd have to lie again. Some days I could barely function. And I really think that the cost of covering up contributed to the really deep trauma that I ended up experiencing. And so ultimately, I reached a point where I decided that I actually couldn't be silent anymore. It was clear that I was being pushed out. And so your options, I guess, are to leave quietly, carrying this load, or to stand up and say something. And so for me, it was actually my 11-year-old daughter who was the one that provided that turning point and that light bulb moment where she asked me, "Mum, why don't you tell someone? Maybe someone would help you." And it was that moment that really made me stop and think about what we tell our kids, and that we're supposed to stand up for ourselves and there's no secret too big not to share. And I was worried I was getting into holes that I might not get out of, but I was also worried about a child that was going to go through high school, and how could I ask her to do that if I wasn't going to do it myself? And I didn't do anything rash or quickly because obviously I was dealing with the most powerful people in the country, so It's not something you take lightly. First, I tried to find someone within the government, within the political party to help, but that didn't really lead to any change. They tried to help, but it didn't lead to any change. And so then I took a step which I knew would change my life. And I was scared, and I did it anyway. I ended up holding a press conference. And until then, now as an Australian, the only other thing other than seeing myself on TV I was more afraid of at that point was snakes, which is a real fear to have here. And I remember I've never actually watched it to this day because the purpose was not getting on television. It was to reveal, to rip the Band-Aid off the silence. And so I remember trembling, I remember shaking, and I remember doing it anyway. And I remember knowing the consequences of what would happen to me because I spoke out. And so I did actually think that would lead to some change or some engagement, but actually, no, it didn't. And so then by the end of 2024, I had to take the unprecedented step of personally suing the Deputy Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and the government and taking them to the Federal Court of Australia. So it was a world I never expected to be in. It's obviously a David and Goliath type of battle when you're in that sort of situation. And so obviously it changed me a lot, but it also taught me a lot too. It taught me, and we'll talk about that today, but about my values and about my people, who my people are, because you really learn who your friends are through experiences like this and what you're capable of. But it also, coming back to what you want to talk about today about silence, it's about who speaks up, who doesn't, and what it costs either way. And so leading to what I do now, yes, it's a world I never anticipated I'd be in. I'm running my own business. I'm actually having a lot of fun most of the time. And one of the best things out of it is that I get to help people. I get to help people recover from toxic workplaces. I help educate people about how power works. And I also help people to find their voice so that they can use it when it matters most.
What a journey and what an experience. And I can't wait to dive into it more. But also what a lovely thing to have led you to do now, empowering and supporting those people. Because work and business, they're such a huge part of our lives. There is such a huge part of our time, our identity. And if you're in that space, and I'm sure all of us at some point have been in some kind of toxic work environment, it does have such a huge effect on your happiness and well-being. So it's such a great thing that you're doing now.
Yeah, and I think until you've lived it, it's really hard to explain to people why it impacts you so badly. And so that's something that I lean into too, because I've been through hard things before. I've worked in war zones, I've worked on kidnapping cases, I've survived cancer, very aggressive type of cancer. I've done hard things. But this put me in places I'd never been to before. And I think because it's so mean and it's so targeted, and often the people who are targeted are high-performing people. I've learned a lot about the dynamics of toxic workplaces, and I didn't realise that I ticked so many of the boxes. But that comes as a shock too, because like you said, it impacts your identity, also your financial stability. Yeah. It's very destabilising when it happens. So if I can help people who are navigating through their own situations, then that's taking that experience to try and help up.
Yeah, and making something positive from it. So a lot of the women that I work with, or even just that I know, they know what they want to say, whether it's in their business, in their work, in their personal life, but they tend to hold back. Why do you think speaking up feels so hard?
So I think you've touched on something really important. It's not that women don't know what we think. We know. What we're working through is the consequences of saying it.
Yeah.
So I think there's no one single answer. Some of it's imposter syndrome, and if you get it wrong and those sort of nerves. Sometimes it's around how much we're conditioned as women to be good, what good looks like. Yeah. And it's to be compliant. It's not to be disruptive. It's not to challenge the status quo. It's not to be too difficult. It's not to be too aggressive. And so working through the consequences or the costs that you see of speaking up, I think people hold back. And look, it's not wrong. It's actually, in some ways, it's actually a very intelligent read of the environment.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes what we don't talk about is it can sometimes seem like the safest move, and it can be in the short term, but it's often not in the long term. And the other point is that there's always a cost to silence, whether it's on you or it's on someone else, but someone pays the cost of that silence. Yeah. In a lot of the power dynamics work that I do, it's understanding how that works, because obviously certain behaviour is allowed to continue if it's not challenged, if it's not questioned. And so there's a cost.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely spot on. Like I said, that there's a couple of things. There's the societal conditioning side, and there's the fear of judgment or of getting it wrong side, for sure. But here you speak about the cost. When we were chatting about this episode and what we thought we would talk about, you were telling me about your term of the cost of comfort. You mentioned the cost
yes.
a few times. So can you explain what that means and how staying quiet actually holds people back or creates that cost?
That's true, because remaining silent is just one form of comfort. So I actually wrote about this on my Substack around New Year with New Year's resolutions, because I think sometimes comfort is really underestimated as a really determinative force in our lives. And it makes us decide things that we don't even acknowledge, right? Now, that's whether or not it's in a personal or a professional context. In that particular article, I think I went through, if you had a health objective and you have to ultimately work out, you need to choose your heart. So is the cost of comfort of staying on the couch, not going for the run that you promised, that may be comfortable right now, and it may feel like the easy choice, but then the hard part comes later on the consequences on your health. Yeah. So if we're looking at a silence type of thing, the cost of comfort is, I don't want to say anything in that meeting. I don't want to upset anyone. What if I get it wrong? All of those things. But the cost then of that comfort of not saying the thing, of holding back, also has consequences. It's about choosing your heart. Will you be brave enough to say something, or will you hold back? And what is the cost of that comfort, and what is the cost of that silence?
Yeah, because like you said, that cost can be on a number of levels, can't it? It could be a cost of health. It could be a cost of happiness or fulfillment. It could be a cost of, like, a financial cost, like you say, if you're not willing to speak up, put yourself forward for something, pitch yourself in your business, really talk about what you want to talk about from your heart. Like you said, there's so many different costs. And what I often find with the women that I work with, like you say, that silence. And it's a little bit like you said earlier around, like, it's actually quite an intelligent reading. Ultimately, your brain is trying to keep you safe at all times. It's not trying to necessarily say the thing or do the thing. It is scanning the environment for threats. It's thinking, can I predict what is going to happen here? How much certainty do I have about what's going to happen if I do say X, Y, Z? Then if it can't, like say, it's looking for that comfort, it's looking for that familiarity. So if you are doing something that throws your brain out, it is going to sense that as a threat, and it's going to want to do something safe. And
you're right. And yeah, comfort, sorry, just to jump in there, but comfort will often default to inaction or delay.
Yeah.
So it keeps you stuck.
Yeah.
And you're right. I was talking about a meeting, I was talking about a health sort of thing. It can also be professionally or personally around avoiding a conversation that you know that you need to have, and you keep putting it off until that issue becomes so big, right? So it's not just being quiet in a meeting. It could be around the job that you have, that you know it no longer fits you. But the easy thing, the default thing, the comfortable thing is for stability and everything else to stay where it is. But what is that costing you? Yeah. So choose your heart.
Yeah. Exactly. Something else that I often say to my clients as well is there's a cost here and there's a cost there, and you have to negotiate with your brain almost to make the cost of what you're not getting, or that you're missing out on, higher than the cost of keeping you safe. So you've had your own experience about not speaking up in a really high pressure environment. You told us a little bit about that at the beginning. What do you feel that has taught you?
So, yeah, drawing on what you just said about weighing up the costs. So in the first part of that scenario where I was quiet and the silence, what I guess I didn't expect was the impact of that silence. So on me, on my family, on my health, on my sleep, on my mental well-being, on everything, right? And so these are the mounting costs that over a period of months just continued to grow because of the silence and the covering. And so exactly like you said, that is then where I had to do, I don't think I put it in these terms at the time, but like a cost-benefit analysis, right?
Yeah.
This was costing me a lot. And certainly the pathway of speaking up was not an easy one, but there was a tipping point where it felt to me that staying silent was harder than speaking up. And that was a turning point. And that is not to say that speaking up was easy. It was incredibly difficult. I was going against all my diplomatic training, which is to be consultative and let people know what you're doing. And even if you have to go in a different direction, everybody understands. And my conditioning as a woman not to cause trouble. And also the very real fear of calling out power, standing alone, and the consequences of doing that. But ultimately, I have no regrets because I think one of the things I have learned is that I genuinely believe that I would still be in a world of trauma if I had not spoken up.
Yeah.
I think too, as hard as it was, I'm not downplaying it. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. What I have learned out of that is that it's much easier to do now. So I sometimes talk about courage like a muscle, right? So the first time you go to the gym, it really hurts. You're wondering if but the more that you get out there, the more you go for a run, the longer you go cycling, all those sorts of things. I feel like courage is the same thing. The more that you get to use your voice, the less nervous that you feel, the more that you expect what the reaction might be. Also, you learn not to care as much. You learn to back yourself in. You know your values, and actually, why would you hold yourself back for these people over here who think badly of you? That do they really matter anyway? So there's all sorts of things that you learn, but I do feel now that I've really stepped into the courage because I've learned to use my courage muscles. But it's through hard work like that.
Yeah, no, I love that term around the courage muscles. What do you think that looks like in practice, like day-to-day life, if you were strengthening those muscles and building it up over time? Because it doesn't always have to be done with big things, does it, or big gestures? But when you think about flexing your courage muscles, what does that look like in practice to you, or how you teach it?
Ideally, you don't start with a national press conference. That's not the best way to start.
It was a speed must at the time.
That's probably like running a marathon after you just bought a pair of sneakers.
Yeah.
But there are much smaller ways that you can do it. And I think firstly, it's through conversations like this and just being aware of how much comfort holds us back, or being more conscious when we are not speaking up and asking ourselves why. And so it doesn't have to be a big defining moment. It's just about noticing that. And so I guess if you're in business, it might be about setting a boundary with a client. Right? You've been avoiding having that conversation, but it's actually impacting you, and you're actually going to be brave enough to have the conversation. It might be even disagreeing with somebody nicely in a conversation where you would normally be very compliant. And it might be speaking up or asking questions in a meeting that you normally don't. Or the one that I really value, actually, the role of bystanders. If you see someone who is being treated unfairly, whether or not it's at work or whether it's just in a shop, like it can be anywhere. Instead of, we see this, the first instinct is people record it on their phones or something. Go and help, or just say something, or question it, or see if the person's all right, but don't leave them to it, or ask, or if somebody's treating someone badly, you actually have an opportunity either to maybe ask a question, to intervene, to step in. It doesn't have to be loud and dramatic, or to at least support the person and stand with them afterwards. There's different ways, but mostly I think the most important thing is it just has to be a bit different. It just has to lean into that discomfort a little bit further into the water than you've been before. And so that's how the patterns start to shift, and that's how you start to use your courage muscles.
Yeah, no, I love that. Especially the thought around make a different decision in the moment, for sure. But specifically the one that resonated with me there was like offering help or speaking up in the moment when you see something else happening. Because I think we can all resonate with a time where we've walked away and said, oh, I wish I'd said that, or I wish I'd spoken up, or I wish I'd checked on that person. I know that there's one scenario definitely coming up in my mind. I'm sure there will be for other people as well. So yeah, I think doing that and feeling not just for yourself, but for other people, I think is like it's a really big gesture.
I think so too. I'm a huge advocate of the role and the power of bystanders. You can completely turn around a situation. I think sometimes we just think because we're the witnesses to something, we don't have the power, enormous power of bystanders. It's really quite incredible. And yes, that's a great place to start.
So for somebody who knows that they're holding back, perhaps in a specific situation, whether it's in life, in business, in work, what's the first step you would suggest them taking? Because I know you gave some examples of things that people can do. If someone's suddenly going from silence to suddenly speaking up can feel like a big leap. What would you say is like the first step to someone who notices that they're keeping silent, that they're holding back?
Like I said, I think the first thing is that you notice it and you're more conscious of it and you're aware of it. And I think if you're not in a position at that point, you're not brave enough to in that moment do something, maybe just take some time to reflect and question yourself as to the why. Sometimes there's really legitimate reasons, like you have fears. I think sometimes it's the uncertainty that breeds the fears.
Yeah.
So we may not even be able to articulate it, but it's like everyone will hate us or the world will end. And actually, when you step in and you actually do something and the world doesn't end, that is partly of what breeds the confidence then to be able to do it again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I 100% agree. Awareness is key. It's something else that I say, you can't change what you're not aware of. You can't understand what you're not aware of. And it's always one of the first steps that I do with my clients when whatever block that they've obviously got a goal, they've come to me, they want something, they've got a goal. And one of our first steps is understanding what's the actual block. So if I do this, then X is going to happen. And that means Y or Z or whatever. So yeah, I think, like you say, getting a clear idea of, okay, what is the fear? What do I think is going to happen? Because then once you are more of aware of where your thoughts are going, like say, you can start to question it. You can start to account for it, balance it, think about how you might protect yourself, or actually what the truth of the way could go. What else could be true? What other thing could happen than the thing that I'm worried about happening?
That's right. That's right. Often it's not as bad as we think it's going to be.
No. So bring it back then to the topic of self-worth, because obviously we're at self-worth school. How much of this whole thing do you feel comes back to self-worth? Because from my perspective, if you either don't fully believe that your voice matters or you're worried about something that might happen, it can be really hard to use it. So what do you see as the link to self-worth when it comes to speaking up?
So I think self-worth definitely plays a role. If you don't believe your voice matters, then it's much harder to use it. But I also think that we can sometimes get this around the wrong way a little bit, because you don't necessarily wait to feel confident to speak.
Yeah.
Speaking is how you build that confidence so you get better at it. So every time you use your voice, you're reinforcing that it matters, that you matter, that your views matter. And so I think it's a practice. It does come back to the courage muscles again. It's a self-perpetuating. It will help build your self-worth.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so when I talk about self-worth and confidence, I say self-worth is that inherent knowing that you are a value, that you matter, that you're capable and worthy of doing things. And the confidence is the action that you take that comes from that. And I think you're right. I think both can feed that. I think the more that you can ground yourself in the fact that you're worthy and capable of speaking up, doing the thing, and using that knowledge to take action, even if you do feel scary. Because like I say, if you wait to feel 100% confident and ready to speak up, say something and say, yeah, I'm 100% convicted and behind this, I have no fear at all, then you'll be waiting for ages.
Forever. Yes.
But I always say the best combination is both that grounding, that foundational, but yes, the action as well, because it's the speaking out or the taking action or the doing things that builds that self-trust that then shores up that self-worth and therefore going in that cycle. So it's a bit of, yeah, grounding yourself actually, in my opinion does matter, or I do deserve to be treated XYZ, and getting yourself to the point where, like I say, you're flexing those courage muscles, you're doing those little bits at a time, building more self-trust and confidence, and therefore, yeah, building up self-worth at the same time.
Yeah, I agree.
And what does this look like in business or entrepreneurship? So where speaking up might be things about sharing your opinion, setting boundaries, or putting yourself forward, because what we've been speaking about up until this point is often speaking up against maybe something. But what does it look like when you're speaking up, say sharing opinions, setting boundaries, putting yourself forward for things?
Sure. So yes, I think the setting boundaries, setting opinions, there's the easy ones. I think when you come back to self-worth too, it can even be through really specific things like your pricing structures, right? Part of that comes from self-worth and confidence. Definitely. And being brave enough to say it out loud, right? That you're worth it. And so I think in business, voice really does show up everywhere. But I think there's another thing, and this goes beyond business, but it is also relevant to the business world, that when you speak up, you often end up realizing that you're not alone. So I think sometimes when we're quiet, we think that we're the only ones that feel a certain way. And so if you step up and say something or do something, you sometimes give other people the permission to feel that way and to say the thing too. And that's how change happens. It's not just one voice, but it's one voice that helps make it easier for others to follow.
Yeah. Yeah. Using that kind of inspiration and thinking, hey, where have I seen this and really respected it? You
Yeah.
know, and what do I want to do in terms of leading that way for other people?
Yeah, I know, for example, when I went through my situation, LinkedIn was an amazing platform to connect with people all over the globe. But people I never knew reached out to say, I see what you're doing and it matters, keep going. But I also had people even a year later writing to me to say, I've been following your work for a while. When you spoke up, this was happening to me in my workplace. And because of what you did, I was able to, I was going to give up and walk away, but I kept fighting. Or because of what you did, I did this. And so, yeah, those, I, of course, love those stories because it does show the power and the impact it can have on someone else. And so that's exactly what I convey too, is that you never know the ripple effects.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they must be such lovely messages to receive, to know that even if it was through a bit of hardship on your part, like somebody has learned and seen what you've done and taken that as inspiration to, say, set their own boundaries or make their own life better. That must be such a cool thing to read.
It's also been really useful because obviously when you do something like I did, you lose a lot of people to people in, like I was, and when we come back to silence, they showed themselves through this. It was very loud in that silent way.
Yeah.
And again, that's because they assessed their environment and there was a risk to speaking up or when I was taking on power and those sorts of things. And so they made themselves known through their silence. But again, the people who's speaking up. So here's another good example. Sometimes you don't know. Maybe you're seeing somebody who got trolled on social media. You could send them a message or just a message of support. And you have no idea how much it will really help them and help them continue to go, because even having someone validate that how they're being treated is unfair can really help the person on the other end. And so I'm happy to say that for everybody I've lost, I've got more people in my world now, and they're the type of people that I know share my values. And yeah, as I call it, finding my people. I've found my people through, consider it a gift, actually. Yeah, it's shocking in a way, but it really sorts everyone out. The little niggles that you might have. Is that person really on my side? Do they really cheer for my success? Let me tell you, you do something
Really
like
shows
this, you know automatically.
even though it feels scary to lose those people and connections sometimes, because ultimately we're all looking for a sense of approval and belonging. And so it is actually quite hard to think about being rejected by people. But like I say, when you do that and actually you invite better people in who are more aligned with your thing. I know you and Jade, did you run an event recently called Find Your Tribe or something?
Yeah, finding your people. It really resonated, actually. Yeah.
It is, because I feel like, especially for a certain time of life, again, I don't know if it's just the environments I'm in or the feed that I see on LinkedIn or what have you, but or me turning to entrepreneurship only a few years ago, I think it does make you find your own tribe. And I think particularly it certainly feels to me like business owners, especially when you come together, there's a certain like finding your tribe because you're of the same mindset, you're looking through those same challenges, much like it would be for people, I'm sure, working within a particular industry. You're going to find your tribe, but it will be, like I say, people that are also aligned with your values and how they work, whether that is in employment or business anyway.
And so it actually reminds me of a really small tip that I actually gave at that evening, actually, which when we're looking at why we're being silent or the cost of comfort or why we're holding back, social media, right? Now, the amount of times, I'm sure you get this too, where people say, oh, I saw this on social media. It's really interesting that you see my stuff because I never see any kind of engagement, right?
All the time.
Why? Why? It's free, but it's silence. It's another form of silence. Now, if you really are not jealous of your friend, if you really want their business to succeed, you don't have to be buying their products. You don't have to be doing those sorts of things. But use those thumbs. That's a form of not being silent, but it also really helps other people, right? Like, why are you holding back? It's free. You're seeing it anyway. Hit that like button.
Yeah, no, definitely resonate with that. I get that they might not be my ideal clients, or maybe they see so much content from me over the years that they go a bit blind. But yeah, definitely. Or even if it's not necessarily people that aren't, my family or friends, it might be that idea that you never really know who's watching, who's engaging with your content, because someone will say, oh my God, I've been listening to your podcast, or I just love your content. I'm like, I literally didn't even know you were, you weren't even on my radar. Like you say, you've never liked anything, never kind of, I said, I don't have to, but when we were talking earlier about using your voice, speaking up, talking about things where you're supporting other people, I think that's the key thing of it. And maybe it's for us as well to express that kind of support is something that we really, that we really want and that we really are grateful for.
It's free, it's quick, it's easy. We all know that the internet can be a complete cesspool and the negativity can really dominate everything. So one way you can use your voice and not be silent is literally to amplify the voices of others who are trying to send the positivity into the world, who are trying to help, who are trying to do the good things. And so it's another really easy everyday way that we can all do to help each other. Like I said, free, and it's just about not being there and not being silent.
Yeah, no, that's such a great and example and different angle to come at it from. So if somebody's listening to this lesson today and it's really resonated with them and they know they're holding back more than they want to, what's the one lesson you would want them to take away from this conversation? If they remembered nothing else, what do you want them to take away today?
So I think on the topic at hand, I think the one thing that I'd want people to take away is that so often we ask ourselves, is it safe to speak up? Whereas I think the question should be, what is it costing me to stay silent?
Love that. Yeah, perfect. And what is one small way they could use their voice this week? So I always ask, I guess, teachers to set a little bit of homework, a small, simple, practical action, something that feels doable that could move them forward. What's one little homework task you would set them to put all this into practice?
I think if your instinct is to stay quiet in a personal sense, find one moment where you push yourself into discomfort and say something in a conversation or a meeting. I think if you're normally silent online, hit that like button and just push yourself out there. And I guess if you've been holding back or avoiding a conversation, maybe put some thought into how or when you might do it, because I have no doubt whatever the conversation is, it's costing you the longer it's delayed. The point is, it's not to be too deliberate, like dramatic. It's about being deliberate about it, because every single time you use your voice, it gets easier.
So do something deliberate this week.
Yeah.
Nudge your voice in that direction. Awesome. And then just one final question for you, Jo. Other than the situation that you filled us in about that's brought you to being here today, what's something that you wish you'd said earlier in life, but you didn't at the time?
So I'm not sure if it's about where I didn't say anything, a particular moment, but when we're looking at silence in the broader cost of comfort, I do now look back, because I feel so liberated after what I've gone through, at how much I must have held back over the years to please people who don't matter. That I didn't live the biggest life, or I didn't do the big things, or I didn't say the thing because I was holding myself back because of other people. And that is something that I reflect on. But in terms of the situation that I was in, I think obviously it had to take a timeline of its own, but I certainly never regretted speaking up, because even though it cost me a lot, my government career, relationships with people I thought I was friends with, the relief of telling the truth was almost immediate. It was like a weight lifted. And for the small pool of people that knew who was going on, it was literally just a handful of people that I brought into that world. They said they could see the difference in me that same day because I'd spoken up and told the truth. And it didn't mean that everything got solved completely, but like I said, if I had not spoken up, I think I'd still be living in deep trauma. And so I have no regrets. That experience gave me my voice. I live with my integrity. It gave me a sense of control over my story and my life again. And I know that by doing so, I can help others. And I wouldn't trade that for the world.
Definitely not. That's awesome. Jo, thank you so much for being on Self-Worth School. I've no doubt this lesson is going to be so useful, and it's going to find the exact people who need to hear this stuff. So we're going to leave some details to connect with Jo in the show notes. So do go and check those out. But yeah, Jo, thank you so much for being our guest teacher today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Rosie. It's been fun.
So there we have it. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Do I have the best guests or do I have the best guests? I just love that it's a reminder that courage isn't really about fear disappearing or being the bravest person in the room. It's about deciding that something matters enough to act anyway. And I think Jo explained it so beautifully that speaking up isn't about those huge dramatic moments. Sometimes it's setting a boundary or disagreeing politely with someone, backing yourself in a meeting or with clients. It's supporting someone else publicly or finally saying the thing that you've been sitting on for months. Because every time you use your voice, you reinforce something that's really important, and that's that your thoughts matter, your feelings matter, and you matter. And the more that you practice that, the easier it becomes. So if you take one thing from this episode, other than obviously what Jo said, let it be this, that there's always a cost to silence too. And maybe the question isn't, is it safe to be speaking up right now? Maybe it's, what is staying safe and quiet costing me? If this episode resonated, please do share it with somebody that you think might need it, or do share it on your stories on socials. Give me and Jo a tag. Now, Jo has really generously contributed something for you all to check out. It's Recovering from a Toxic Workplace video series. If that's something that feels like it's hanging on with you, she's given us a special discount. You can find out more details in the show notes, along with the links to follow her as well. But till next time, just remember how awesome you are and keep showing up. Have a great day.